Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon here in our offices in the Bronx. I'm reaching out to you today, December 5th. It's approximately 11:30 in the afternoon. I saw two articles today that are very interesting, and they're talking about the future of the globe and poverty and how we can defeat that. And I think it's very important that we have a realistic conversation about it. And I hope you'll join me for the entire video to see this, to see what's going on. But before we get started, I do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know we do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that we can to be able to hear your voice from anywhere in the world, whether or not the internet overlords like it, whether or not your government may like it. We want to hear what you have to say about the issues that are affecting us all, because we believe in the First Amendment. It's not just an American principle. You have a right to speak about the things that affect you, no matter where in the world you may be. So we hope you'll join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we reach out globally on a regular basis to hear what people have to say. Now, one of the big subjects in the entire world for forever has been poverty. It's one of the biggest issues that the world has been trying to defeat, whether it's the war on poverty here in the United States, which has failed, or anywhere else in the world. No one has come up with a solution to deal with poverty. To some extent, it's always going to exist, but how do we reduce that? One of the biggest things that has been suggested is universal basic income, otherwise known as UBI. You often hear about this from the progressive left. It's their latest, greatest craze. It's part of the movement towards socialism and to communism. It's the government paying you a fixed income every month so that you'll be able to live. There's some problems with that. In fact, there's a lot of problems with that, and it never works. It has never worked. And I want to go over the suggestion that we're hearing from the left that it does work. Now, in particular, today there were two articles that caught my attention. The first one is from Reuters talking about the state of the world. Since 2020, the shutdown of the planet, the impact that we have seen that has come from the pandemic in reference to our children. We now see that in 81 countries, according to Reuters, in 81 countries, their testing of children, teenagers, in terms of reading, math, science, they're all low scores. We have seen a significant impact. Now, I think that's kind of important because when we think about this, if the youth do not understand reading, they don't have reading comprehension, then they don't have language. They don't have the ability to think. Language is a function of thought, and the lower our ability to comprehend and communicate, to read and write and to speak, the lower that becomes, the less we can do. And that's dangerous. But it is this combination of a lessening in the reading comprehension, the reading capabilities, language capabilities of our youth, and general malaise that comes to mathematics in the general public that contribute to the idea of a universal basic income. The more that people stay away and fear or try to not pay attention to mathematics, the easier it is to use math as a political tool to gain power. And that's what I think universal basic income is. It is a push by the left to be able to gain more power. Because if you have a universal basic income, if the government or elected officials are providing you with money to survive month by month, you have to keep those people in power or someone else will take that away from you and now you won't be able to survive. It is basic manipulation. It's economic manipulation. It is essentially economic slavery in our opinion. But it is a very popular idea. This idea that if you were to get $2,000 or thereabout, about 10% of your income per month given to you by the government, your life is going to be great. You will stop being poor and you'll be able to have a better quality of life. Doesn't really work that way. So that's the first article, and that's from Reuters. In talking about the world, we see that kids are less capable today than they were in, say, 2019. That's a problem. Now add to that the other significant problem, which we're seeing from Vox, which is the world's biggest experiment on universal basic income. This is being done by a quasi-political organization called Give Directly, created by several students in MIT and Harvard. Yes, Harvard, where indoctrination has gotten so extreme that the students have been trained to support Hamas, a terrorist organization. Obviously, that has negative consequences attached to that. But the idea that came out of MIT, that came out of Harvard, that came out of academia is, well, if we just give people stuff for free, they'll do better. That's the premise. And in 2012, that's exactly what this organization did. They started giving money to people in Kenya, the largest universal basic income experiment, which would take 12 years, should end, actually it was started in 2017, and it should end in 2029. And the concept is, if we gave you 10% of your income every month, what will happen? Over 200 villages in Kenya have been part of this experiment, and we started to get some data, which is what Vox is talking about here. They're getting back the first results, and those results are eye-opening. They're shocking. Now, the article itself reads more like a promotional ad for Give Directly than anything else. And they don't really go into who Give Directly are. But before we address who Give Directly is and where does the money come from, let's address something first. Kenya. Where is Kenya? Kenya is an African nation, and they are a third world nation. That means they're poor. They're not the poorest nation on the planet, but they are far from a second world nation, which would be Greece or Spain. Even Thailand or Vietnam would be considered more second world nations, and Kenya is a third world nation. And they have about $110 billion in GDP. Now, to the average person, that sounds like a huge amount of money. But to put it into perspective, without making people lose their minds about income, the fact is that the GDP of Kenya, the nation, is 6 times smaller than the city of Chicago. I want to put that in perspective again to give you a good understanding. Kenya, a third world nation, is 1/6 the GDP of the city of Chicago. In fact, even though for more than a decade we have seen the income of the average person in Kenya increase on a monthly basis, that they have improved their nation for more than a decade now, they make substantially less than most people in the world, and especially most Americans. To be specific, I'm going to be talking about a time period in 2017 as the baseline, and I'll explain that in one second. But without getting too deeply in the math, to give you a good understanding, in 2017, according to the BBC, the average Kenyan made about $150 a month. I want to put that in perspective. They made $150 a month in 2017. Today, it's about $650, roughly, to give you some perspective. According to the United States Census for 2017, the average American was making a little over, the median American was making about $69,000 a month. $69,000 a year. Without getting too bogged down in the numbers, we're going to round that off. It's about $5,500 per month, or roughly about $1,400 per week that the average American would make. Not $150. In 2017, the average American made about $5,500. The average Kenyan made $150. At this time in 2023, according to the latest numbers in 2021, roughly the average Kenyan was making about 1/10 what the average American makes per month. So there has been some improvement, and we want to focus on Give Directly. So what Give Directly is doing, and their goal, is to introduce a universal basic income into roughly 200 villages in Kenya, with 100 villages being the control group, something to compare it to that they're not doing anything with. Of the 200 villages, they have divided into 3 different groups. One group will get $500 lump sum. There will be, some of the villages are going to they'll get $20 a month for 2 years, and another group of villages will get $20 a month, and they will get it for 12 years. So they have a short-term, long-term, and lump sum example to show and to try and get a comparison to see if a universal basic income will improve the lives of these individuals. Now, without going crazy in the math, I know people hate math. There are several problems with this right off the bat. The first one being, it's not a fair comparison at its core. You see, the money that is being injected into Kenya isn't coming from Kenya. So the inflation that this would cause does not factor in. Remember, countries have to pay this to their people. So this is coming from the government to the people. That means it's inflationary. They have to print money they don't have, that doesn't exist, to be able to pay this off. To give you an example, there's about 160 million people who work in the United States. If you were to give just the 160 million who are working in the United States a universal basic income, not the 330 million, just the 160 million, that would cost approximately $3.2 trillion. Let me say that again. $3.2 trillion to give 160 million working Americans $2,000 a month. That's $3 trillion we don't have. We would have to print that on an annual basis. That's another 10% of inflation if it were just in this year. If it were 2023, you would add 10% inflation onto everything that you buy, everything that you earn, everything that you need. It would cost more, and it would hurt the poor because prices would go up, eating away all of the gains that they have. As an example, under Bidenomics, what we have seen is from the day that Joe Biden came into office, he has spent an additional roughly 17% to the national debt, 17.3%. We have seen inflation increase by 16%. The reason in part, and again, we're going simple math here, is we're spending money we don't have, which increases the cost of everything, and the poor are the most affected by this because incomes didn't increase by 20%. And so inflation ate up any gains people did make, and most people didn't make them. The poor got priced out. They're hurt worse. Why is this important for Kenya and the example of universal basic income? Because it is a fundamental flaw that is not addressed by the left, or Vox in this case, in trying to tell you that it is a great success. The money isn't coming from Kenya. The money is coming from donations that are coming from countries around the world, and in particular, the World Economic Forum. Give Directly receives the money they are using to pay for the experiment in Kenya from several countries, from several governments, and from the Global Innovation Fund. Their money is a donation. So this is money outside of Kenya being put into Kenya, including from Google, several countries, and the Global Innovation Fund. The Global Innovation Fund is an international nonprofit which has ties directly to the World Economic Forum and being able to advance certain progressive ideology around the world. And its head happens to be Alex Zwane, an individual who is directly tied to the World Economic Forum. Well, what a surprise there. But it doesn't end there. The board of directors of the Global Innovation Fund, they're a hodgepodge of individuals that are made up of elites from schools such as Harvard, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Georgetown University, in effect, a huge hodgepodge of the far left academia and progressive ideologues. Now, I bring all this together to give you a good understanding of what we're seeing in the Vox article. The Vox article wants to highlight universal basic income as a success, as a great idea, that you're going to get money every month and that this would be a good thing. The article goes on to highlight that, to the surprise of many, at least initially, the initial report is currently stating that the universal basic income isn't the best way to help people in poverty. In fact, in looking at the article, what we find out is giving a lump sum upfront to individuals is the best way to allow individuals to become self-sufficient. They start their own businesses, they are able to invest that money, and they are able to directly reap the rewards that has outpaced receiving a short-term amount of universal basic income or even the long-term input of universal basic income. So if you're going to give people money, it's better to do it all at once, not in dribs and drabs. Even though they're giving 13% of a person's monthly income to them through this outside source, not taking into account inflation. Inflation is a big factor. But Vox has an agenda. They have a goal. And throughout the article, they want to frame universal basic income as a success, that it is good for you, that it is something we should adopt. And in the experiment in Kenya, even though the early data is saying that universal basic income isn't the best way to help people exit poverty, they're telling you that it's the way to make people feel the best. We see that the article goes directly into the subjective feelings of the writer as he talks about his experience in going to one of the 200, in fact, 300 villages that are part of this experiment. One village, not 300, not 200, but just one village, and he tells you how great that experience was and how well the people were using the monthly, long-term universal basic income to advance themselves. But he leaves out the fact that the study has found that's not the best way to advance people out of poverty. In fact, it's the second to last paragraph in the article where we see that the true feelings, the real purpose of this article comes through. They want to advance the idea of a universal basic income, even though it isn't the most effective answer to poverty. That they want to advance how people feel, not how people live. Even though a lump sum, if we must give money without taking into account the impact of inflation, if we were to just give money to poor people, that would have the best overall impact in taking them out of poverty. It isn't what they want to emphasize. They want to make people feel better about living in poverty. And therefore, long-term universal basic income is the answer. They want you to feel good about being poor, not to not be poor. I think this is very revealing about the truth on the progressive social push to the left. That they want you to feel a certain way, not to live a certain way, not to improve yourself, but to feel better about the limitations that have been put upon you. See, if we take a step back, and again, I've tried to keep this as light on math as possible, but the fact is, inflation is a reality. And you can't say, well, Mike, here's the answer is we'll just tax part of the money these people are getting. Well, then you're not giving them $2,000 a month or 10% of their income. You're not doing the universal basic income. You're just giving them less money. And you're still not making back the money that you had to put in. See, if the funding from various governments, from the World Economic Forum, and from businesses like Google and Bill and Melinda Gates, if the money stopped coming in, then these people would be back to their poverty status, the ones getting a monthly basic income. Those who had started a business would be able to improve their life, that invested the money. They would be able to still take advantage. So in extending the amount of time that people are using a universal basic income, you're extending the time period that those people are dependent on the government and the institutions that are supplementing their income. You're creating wage slaves, literally. You're creating economic slaves. They can't live to the same standard and quality of life that they have with this UBI if you were to take it away. So they will do what you want. They have to. Otherwise, their quality of life goes down because they weren't given the opportunity to use the money all at once. But they feel better about knowing, oh, well, we're always going to get more money, but not enough to change their life, not enough to improve their life, because that's what the lump sum does. I find this article so interesting because it highlights the abject failure of the universal basic income at its core. Article does highlight, well, people didn't give up their jobs, which is one of the complaints that are said about UBI, and that people wouldn't go into alcoholism, which isn't one of the major arguments against UBI. But I do want to address that part of the article too. You see, I'm not aware of any major argument that says, well, if you give people a monthly basic income, they're going to become alcoholics. I've never seen that argument anywhere, but it is an argument that's made by Vox and its writer. Let's actually think about that. For those people who are drug addicts, those people who have addictions, will a basic income get them out of that addiction? No, because it has nothing to do with it. In fact, it might enable them to continue and maintain an addiction they wouldn't be able to maintain otherwise. Because even if they run out of all other money, they still have that guaranteed money coming to them every month to enable them to continue to live in an addicted state. Now, separate of addiction like opioids, various drugs, or alcohol, the UBI still allows people to still be addicted. They're just addicted to the money, to that monthly stipend that is coming to them, either short-term or long-term, that is supplementing their quality of life that they wouldn't be able to do without it. But to give credit to the article, it is found that, well, people who get a UBI, a universal basic income, still work. Well, yes, because it's not replacing all of their income. It is adding to their income. The question really becomes, what happens when Kenya has to pay for it, not Google or MIT or the World Economic Forum? What happens when countries have to pay for it? Well, again, to go back to the United States as the example, it would cost $3.2 trillion just for working Americans. $3.2 trillion. Money we don't have that would increase inflation, which would hurt the very poor people we're talking about, which is about 11% of America. So every American, 100% of Americans would be hurt. We give 50%. Half of America is working, 160 million people. We give them $2,000 a month. That increases the national debt, affecting 100% of Americans, 330 million people, increasing the prices for everyone in the nation. And therefore, the 11% that make up those in poverty are hurt worse than everyone else. Even though they may or may not get part of that basic income, the cost is more than what they're receiving as a benefit. The inflation is higher than what they're actually getting, which means they're hurt more. And everyone else is hurt along with them. UBI doesn't work. It is a great feeling. feels like you're doing something positive. It allows politicians and elected officials to say, we did something. It allows the progressives to sleep at night saying they have done positive in the world without considering the consequences. It's kind of like what we saw with the pandemic. In locking down the schools and depriving children the ability to learn, there is a long-term consequence, which we are seeing now globally. Well, the same thing with the universal basic income. The long-term consequences, you've created an economic slave. The best thing you could do, if you have to do this, is to give a lump sum. But again, that doesn't take away the impact of inflation that hurts the poor more than it helps the poor. I wanted to try and talk about this without throwing too many numbers at people, because I know the more numbers you throw at people, the more they lose their mind and they forget. But this is more than just about economics. It's about a quality of life. It's about enslaving people based on their feelings and the idea that you did something good when in effect, you've actually done something bad. I hope this makes it clear. I hope it gives people perspective to think about. Maybe there is a way to use universal basic income to benefit people's lives. Maybe having a economically enslaved class of people is a benefit to the world that socialists want to see happen. Maybe. I don't think so. But I want to hear what you think. Now that you've been able to put this into better perspective, when you understand that Vox is not advocating to improve people's lives, but to improve people's feeling about their life, what do you think? I look forward to seeing your answers in the comments. Obey and believe. Hell no! I'm happy to be here with you today. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee has no idea what she's talking about.
You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.